Now that the iPad is out and the new iPhone SDK is out too, I wanted to create a simple iPad app using the new SplitView controller template. So I created a very simple app using the SplitView controller that loads O'Reilly Radar articles using the XML feed for O'Reilly Radar and displays the articles in the table view on the left and loads the article on the right when the user taps on the name of an article. So let's take a look at the finished application that we'll be building in this screencast. So here is the app. As you can see, what it does is it loads the radar articles over here on the left into the table view, and when you tap on one of those links, it loads that article in here on the right hand side. And all I'm doing on the right hand side is just using a simple web view to load the article. So that's what we'll be building today. So I'm going to start from scratch with a new Xcode project and show you how to do that. So I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to choose a split view based application, which as you can see is iPad only. So I'm going to choose that, and I'm going to save this as radar, which creates my project. So let's take a quick look at what we have with the out-of-the-box split view controller. You can see that we have an app delegate, we have a root view controller, and we have a detail view controller. And then under resources, we have a main window nib file and a detail view nib file. So let's go ahead and run this and see what it looks like just straight out of the box. So you can see that we have the two panes, the left table view pane and the right detail view. And as you might guess, the root view controller is what manages this portion, and the detail view controller is what manages this portion. Now, if you are in portrait mode, let's change to portrait mode, you can see that the root view that the root view controller is managing disappears, and instead we get a tab button up here in the navigation bar that allows us to see the items in the root view controller. Now the split view controller template has code that takes care of doing all of that for you, so you don't have to worry about hiding the table view and creating the pop-up, the pop-over, etc. It's all handled for you, as we'll see in a minute. So let's go back to the code, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a model class for the articles. The articles we're going to load those by grabbing the XML from the O'Reilly Radar feed and storing the articles in our model, and then using that model as the source for both the root view controller and the detail view controller. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a new file. I'm going to call it, it's an Objective-C class, and it's based on NSObject, and I'm going to call it articles. Now the root view controller is going to need to access articles in order to load the article titles into the table view. So I'm going to add an outlet for articles in root view controller right away. And I'm going to make it a property. So I'm going to copy that and then copy that. And then we can't forget to synthesize articles in the .m file, so I'm going to jump over to that and add articles here. Okay, so now that we have our outlet, I am going to open up the main window nib, and we're going to take a look at that and go ahead and hook up our outlet for articles as well. Okay, so let's take a look at the main window nib for the split view controller. You can see that we have the normal stuff up here, and then we have the split view controller here, which consists of a couple of pieces. We've got the navigation controller, which contains the navigation bar, and the root view controller, so that's the part in the left hand side, and then we have the detail view controller, which is on the right hand side. So I'm going to first add an instance of articles by dragging in an NS object and changing the class to articles. And then I'm going to go ahead and link the outlet in our root view controller to that instance, effectively creating an articles instance that is pointed to by the root view controller. Now I'm going to close this and I'm going to open the detail view nib. And you can see that the detail view nib contains the detail view, shows it in portrait mode, which contains a navigation bar at the top and a label. All it's got is a label in here. So I'm going to get rid of this label and I'm going to add a web view instead. So just drag in a web view, and I want it to take up the whole part of the screen when we're in portrait mode, so I'm going to drag it out like that. And then I'm going to add a label back in on top of the navigation bar. So I'm going to drag over a label and I'm going to extend it so that it takes up the whole space, because this is going to be the title of the article that we're looking at. And I'm going to change it so that it is center aligned. Now if you look at the detail view controller, you will see that it already has an outlet for detail description label, which was set up with the that could have been hooked up to the label that was in the middle of the web view, where the web view is now. But I'm going to go ahead and use this to hook it up to the label that's sitting in the navigation bar, since it's sitting there waiting to be used. And then I need to jump back to detail view controller in my code and add a UI web view. And I'm also going to make a property out of the web view. So of course I need to go to over here and synthesize that. So just add that at the end. Now when I go back to Interface Builder, I should now be able to hook up the web view to the web view in the view. All right. So that's really all we need to do with Interface Builder for now. So I'm going to quit out of Interface Builder. And let's go ahead and build and run, make sure we have no mistakes. We do have quite a few mistakes. I forgot to include a class reference for articles in my root view controller, and I'm going to go ahead and import it over here in the implementation. So that should fix those errors. Let's try and build again. Good. And let's run it and make sure it's all looking good, and it is. And you can see we've got our label, and our label here is gone, and this is a web view, but since there's nothing being loaded in it, you're not seeing anything. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's take a closer look at the root view controller and see if we can see what's going on inside it. So we have a view did load up here with the normal stuff, which is super view did load, but we also have a couple of new things. Clear selection on view will appear, and content size for view in popover. And these are methods to handle the popover. That, like I said, it's all been handled for you, so you don't have to worry about this. It's just there to do the right thing with the popover. I'm going to add one more thing to view did load, and I'm going to set the title on the root view, that's the table view on the left hand side in that navigation bar, by doing self.title equals, and I'm going to call this O'Reilly Radar Articles. So now when we launch that, you'll see a nice title in that left pane when you're in landscape mode. Now let's scroll down a little bit more and notice that should auto rotate to interface orientation is yes, which is a requirement for iPad applications, so take a note of that. It's different from iPhone applications. And then notice that by default our table view is being set up with 10 rows in the section, and we're going to change that when we have our articles already. And then we have our self-erode index path. These are just the normal table view data source methods that you would normally see in any view controller for a table view. And then we come down here to the bottom and everything looks normal. We're going to come in here and update our dealloc with the appropriate deallocs for the properties that we've added, which in our case is just articles. And I'm in the habit of doing both a release and a setting to nil, something I learned in one of my iPhone classes. So now that we've looked at root view controller, let's take a look at detail view controller. And again, you can see that the detail view controller has some popover handling things that might look a little different to you. This code is defining a private property for the popover controller and a private method configure view that extends the public interface for detail view controller. And we're going to look at configure view here again in just a moment. In the implementation, you can see that we have a set detail item, and we're going to come back to that too, but basically what this is doing is setting information about the selected or tapped on item that gets passed into the detail view from the root view controller. And then we have more popover stuff, which we don't have to worry about. And then configure view, this is where we're going to add code to update the user interface when somebody taps on an item either in the popover or on that table view in the left when you're in landscape mode. And you can see that detail description label.text is detail item description. Since we're not yet passing in a detail item, this isn't going to work. So for now, let's comment this out and set this to detail description label.text equals at O'Reilly radar. So this will be the default title for the article in the detail view until we figure out how to make this work. And then I'm going to add another call here to another local method, load selected page, that we haven't implemented yet. And I'm going to add that just right here above, and I'm going to define it like this. And what it's going to do is it's going to create a URL string. And since we don't have any of the XML parsed yet, for now I'm just going to hard code this to be the O'Reilly radar page, which is http radar.o'reilly.com. And then I'm going to tell the web view to load the page at that URL. And that's all we have to do. So let's build this and see it working. So I'm going to run this, and what it should do is load the O'Reilly radar page when I select an item from the list into the web view. And it does. So now it's time to add the code to grab the XML for the radar feed and parse it to pull out the article titles and the URLs. So let's take a quick look at some sample feed data and take a look at the bits that we're interested in, which actually isn't that much of the feed data. So I've gone ahead and I've added a file, sample feed data, to my project with some example data, and there's a lot more data that's part of this feed, but I wanted to point out sort of the most important things and the things that we're interested in specifically. So just like any XML feed, it's got the normal XML header up here at the top, and it's got a title and a link for the feed, as well as some other data about the ID and the updated time and the subtitle, etc. And what we're really interested in, however, are these entries. And each article will have an entire entry associated with it. And inside that entry are two key pieces that we're going to be concerned with, and that is the title of the article and the link. And notice that the link doesn't actually have body text. It's just an empty element, but it does have an attribute with the URL of the article, and that is in this href attribute here, and then the URL is a nice and long URL. So what we're going to do is write some code to parse the XML and grab the title and the link and store them in our articles. So let's start by looking at articles.h. I've updated this file, and you can see that I've added two values here, two variables, and one is a mutable array, which is going to be an array that holds all of our articles, and one is some NS mutable data, which is we're going to use to grab the data from the XML feed. And then I've added the article array also as a property to make it easier to manage. So let's take a look at articles.m, which I've also updated with some code, and notice that I've synthesized the article array, of course. And let's first go down here and look at the awake from nib method down here. This is where everything gets going. So what I do here first is I initialize article array to be an array, a mutable array that I alloc init, and so of course I've added the release to the dalloc, and I then call self connect to feed. So let's go up and look at that method. And connect to feed releases any feed data that we may already have, because this will be called potentially multiple times, and then it allocates a new feed data, and it initializes a URL to the URL of the XML feed for O'Reilly Radar, and it turns that into a request and then a connection to grab the data. Now, for asynchronous requests to HTTP, which is what we're doing here, you need to implement a couple of other methods. One is connection did receive data, and the second one is connection did finish loading. Connection did receive data is called when we received some data from our connection, and what we do in this method is just append that data to our feed data variable, which is keeping track of all of the data that we're getting through that connection. And when the connection is finished loading that data, that's when we kick off the parsing of the XML. So if we go up here and we look at parse article XML, you can see that what we do is we initialize a string with that feed data and using the UTF-8 string encoding. And for right now, we're not going to actually do the parsing yet. All I'm going to do is print that data to the screen. So let's give that a try and see if we're getting the correct looking data, see if our connection is made properly, and we can look at the log console to see if that's working as we would like it to. So I'm going to build and run, and you can see that we have a huge long output of data into our console log, and this does indeed look like our O'Reilly Radar data feed. So I think it's working correctly, which is great. So what we need to do now is add in the XML parsing methods, and the way that we're going to do that is we're going to implement the NS XML parser delegate protocol methods. Now these methods are all optional, but so we're just going to implement, I think, 4, which is what we need to do our very simple parsing that we're doing, which just simply pulls out, finds the entries and pulls out the title and the link for each entry. So I'm going to start by adding just the empty method signature so you can see which methods we'll be implementing, and then we'll go in and add more of the code. So I'm going to go ahead and paste in the parser methods. And again, these are methods that are called when you have a NS XML parser delegate, which we'll set as our articles.m file. And as you can see, we have a method that starts the whole thing off, and that is the start document, parser did start document. So this is called when we first see the beginning of a document. We have a method called parser did start element, which is called when we first see the beginning of an element, the opening tag. We have a method called parser found characters, and this is called when we find text characters that we want to keep track of. So that would be, for instance, the title, the characters that appear between the title opening tag and the title ending tag, closing tag. We have a parser did end element method down here, which is what happens when we see a closing tag on an element. And we have a parser did end document. So those are actually the only methods that we need to implement in order to get this working. So I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to jump back to articles.h really quick and add a few more pieces to our interface before we start adding code to the parsing methods. So what I need to add is I need to add a set called tags, and this is going to be used to keep track of the tags that we're actually interested in parsing. I'm going to add an NS mutable dictionary for current article, and this is going to be used, or each article is just going to be a dictionary that we're going to store the title and link, since our articles are very simple. So I'm just going to have a dictionary for each article, and then of course those dictionaries will be stored in the article array. I'm going to add a string called current element name. To keep track of the current element that we're parsing. And then finally a string called current text to keep track of the text that we're parsing. So that's all I need to add to the articles interface file. So I'm going to jump back to the articles implementation file, and we'll start filling in these methods. The first thing I'm going to do is add a definition up here at the top that defines interesting tag names as the collection of titles that I'm actually interested in parsing. So that's entry, title, and link. And then down in the awake from nib method, I am going to add another line that sets up that tag set, which we use to look at the tags that we're interested in parsing. So you can see here that I'm allocating a set that I'm initializing with those objects that I just defined up at the top. Now let's jump back up to parse article XML, and what I'm going to do is add some code that will get the whole parsing process started. And what I'm doing in this code is I am creating an NSXML parser that I'm initializing with the feed data that we grabbed from the XML feed via the URL that we set up. I'm setting the delegate for the parser to self, which means that this object is the one that's going to be called to look for these delegate methods that we already defined down here. And then I'm going to get the whole parsing process underway with atom parser parse. And then once the parsing is complete, then of course I can release the atom parser because I no longer need it. Okay, so the first method that's called when the parsing gets going is parser.did_start_document. And when we see this method, all I'm going to do is add initialization for current element name and current text to nil to make sure we're starting from scratch. The next thing I'm going to do is implement parser.did_start_element. And here's the code for that method. Let's take a close look at it. We're going to check for 3 different things that happen when we start a new element. The first thing we're going to check for is to see if the element that we're starting is an entry element. If our element name is equal to entry, then what we want to do is create a new article and save it in current article. And this is a dictionary so that we can add the title and the link as we find them. And eventually that article will be added to the articles array so we can release the previous version of current article before we create the new one. The second thing we're checking for is if the element name is equal to link. Now remember that unlike title, the value that we're interested in the link element is actually in the attribute href. So what we do is we grab the value of the href attribute, and attribute dictionary is this dictionary that's passed in when we're called that holds all the attributes for that element. And then we set the value for the link in the current article. So we're storing that value. And then finally, if it's not link or entry, then we look to see if the element name is in the tag set that we defined, and the only one that's left is of course the title element. We set the current element name to the element name of this element, which should be title, and then we allocate a new current text because what we're going to need to do is start keeping track of the characters that we find in between the opening and closing title tags in the title element. Now when we do find characters in this method, parser found characters is called, and all we have to do is append those characters to our current text variable, and this will be called multiple times for a given element, so you can't guarantee that you're going to get all of the characters that are in the value of that element the first time it's called, so we just keep appending. Next, when our parser calls parser did end element, we know we've reached the end of an element. So what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if the current element name is equal to the element that was passed in, and if it is, then we know that that we can set the value that we've grabbed in this current text into a key that with the name of current element name. Now, in our example, this is only ever title, but if you were looking for more element values, then you could use this generically to capture more element values that have their value in between the tags rather than as an attribute. However, if it's not title, then we know that the element name is probably entry, and we've reached the end of our entry. So in this case, what we need to do is we add the current article to the article array, which means we've stored away another article, and that means that we can then release it when the next one starts, as you saw earlier. And then all I'm doing is adding a little log string here that prints out the title of the article that we just grabbed. Then we release the current text and set it to nil so that the next time we get another element, we can start from scratch. And then finally, parser did end document, we don't really have to do anything in our case, so all I'm going to do is add an nslog string to indicate that we've reached the end of the document. So that's it. Now remember, of course, that we've added a few things to our class here, so I'm going to update the dalloc so that we make sure that we release all the things that we've added, and that includes the tags. We've got the feed data and then current article. And current text is already being released at the appropriate time, as we just saw in the parser did end element, so I don't have to add that to the dalloc. So let's build and run this and see if we see the article titles that we're printing out in this line right here. And we should see those in the log if all goes well. So I'm going to build, make sure it builds, and then I'm going to try running it. And I'm most interested in looking for those titles, and here they are. So we see all of the titles, and we also see our little end of document message here. So it looks like everything's working as it should. So next, what we need to do is figure out how to get those titles into the root view controller table view. So the first thing I'm going to do to accomplish that is to add a couple of accessor methods to our articles that'll make it easier for the root view controller to grab what it needs from the articles model. So I'm going to add two methods in the .h file. A count method, which will tell us how many articles we have. And a method that pulls out the article at a given index so that we can request a single article at a time. And then I'm going to go over to articles.m and I'm going to implement those methods down here near the bottom. And for the count, all we're going to do is return the article array count. So basically the size of the article array, and for the article at index, I'm going to return the article from the article array at the index that we've been passed in. So those are both very simple. So remember that our root view controller is the data source and delegate for our table view. So we're going to go update our root view controller to grab the article information and display it in the table view. So the first thing we need to do is look for the method number of rows in section. And currently this is hard-coded to return 10. And we're going to change this so that we use the convenience method that we just created in articles to return the count of the articles. And remember, we have a outlet that points to our articles in RootViewController, so we can easily access it. So all we have to do is change this to articles count, and we will get the correct number of articles. The next thing we need to do is to update the cell for row at index path. And remember that this is the method that determines what's displayed in the table view for any given row. So currently we have simply just the text that is the row number being displayed, and that's why you're seeing some rows that already have data in them when we ran the initial program before we had any data being loaded. So we're going to change this so that it actually grabs the information about the article and uses the title as the row value. So we're going to comment this out, and I'm going to grab a article from the articles. I'm going to use again my index article at index convenience method to grab the article that's at index path.row, which is the row of the table that we're currently filling in. And then I'm going to grab the title from that article, and then I'm going to set the text label of the cell to that string. Now the next thing I'm going to do is just a small change up here to the accessory type, because I want the accessory type to show a disclosure indicator. So I'm going to change this from UI table view cell accessory none to UI table view cell accessory disclosure indicator. And you'll see what that does in just a second. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. And I'm going to change it back to landscape mode. And you'll notice that we have no article titles showing up here. They should show up. So what could be causing that? Because if you look back here at the log, we are grabbing the articles. So we know that the articles is working, but they're not showing up in our table view. And what I discovered is that sometimes the RootViewController goes to grab the articles to display in the table view before the XML parsing is actually complete. So the way I got around this was to add a notification to articles so that when the XML parsing is complete and the articles have all been set in the articles array, then we set a notification to tell the RootViewController to reload the data in the table view. So I'm going to go ahead and add that now. So I'm going to jump back to articles.h, and I'm going to add in a string that I'm going to use for my notification. And in the interface file, I'm going to add the definition of that string. And I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to go to the implementation file, and up at the top I'm going to add the actual string value for that. And if you're familiar with using notifications in COCOL, you'll recognize this. It's a typical way of doing it. We define the notification string such that it's easy to find, and define it as an external variable so that other classes can use it. And that's exactly what we're going to do, is we're going to use it in RootViewController. So now that we have the notification string set, let's go and add the actual notification posting that we need to do, and we're going to do this down here in connection did finish loading, because this is where we actually make the call to parse the article XML, so we know when this method returns that we should be done with all of the parsing. So here what I'm going to do is add a call to the notification center to grab the notification center default one. This is the one that everything in the program has access to. And then I'm going to post the notification to the notification center with the object of self. So that's all we have to do to notify that the XML parsing is complete. So now if we jump back to the root view controller, if we look back up here in view.did_load, what we can do is we can get the notification, so again we're grabbing the default notification center, and what we're saying here is we're going to add ourselves as an observer. And when the notification comes in, we're going to call a method called handle XML download complete. And the name of the notification is EMR XML download complete notification, and we don't care about the object. So then what we need to implement, of course, is the handle XML download complete method, which will be called when we get that notification. So this code registers for the notification, and then when the notification comes in, we're going to call handle XML download complete. And this is just a very simple method that takes a notification, and all it's going to do is say redraw or reload the data in the table view. So now notice that because our handle XML download complete takes one argument, we need to actually change the name of this selector method that we're passing in to include a colon so that it can find the method with the argument. So now that that's implemented, let's go ahead and build and run and see if this works. All right, it does. So now we are seeing the articles showing up in the table view, which is great. When we click on them, however, you'll notice that it's just loading the radar page. So we need to update the code next so that when you click on an article, it updates the web view with the correct article. So how do we change the code so that the detail view controller loads the correct article when we tap on an item in the root view controller's table view? Let's take a look at root view controller and scroll down until you find the method did select row at index path. And here's where this detail item comes into play, which so far we've been ignoring. The detail item is the thing that gets passed to the detail view controller when the row is selected. And right now what we're passing in is a string with simply the row number. So we're going to change this so that we're actually passing in the article that was selected. And all we have to do that is we choose the article from the articles array at the index path.row, which is the row number of the currently tapped on row in the table view. So that's how we pass the article to the detail view controller. Once we're in the detail view controller, what we need to do, now remember when the view is updated, what we're going to do is call load selected page, and you'll remember that this is currently hard-coded to just load the radar page, and what we need to do is change that so that if the detail item is not equal to null, we are going to load the article based on the URL in the article dictionary. So I'm going to change this code to say if the detail item is null, then what we're going to do is simply load the radar page. So this is kind of our backup case. However, if the detail item is not null, then we're going to grab the URL from the detail item using the key link, which remember that's where we've stored that href to the article. And then I'm just logging it out here so that we can check our work. And then we're loading the web view just like before with the URL at that string. So depending on which of these cases is true, we'll just load the web view with the correct URL. And then the last thing I want to do is set the title of the article correctly. So instead of just always setting it to O'Reilly Radar, what I want to do in configure view is something really similar, is check to see if detail item does not exist. In other words, it's null. Then we are going to set the title to O'Reilly Radar. However, if it does exist, then we're going to set it to the title that we're going to grab from the detail item. So instead of grabbing the link, we're going to grab the title and we're going to set the label text to that instead. So let's build that and give it a try and see how it works. And it looks like it's working great. I'm tapping or clicking on these items and it's loading the article into the web view, and it's also setting the title of the article into the label up here at the top. And it's looking pretty good. So last but not least, let's add an icon for our application. And I've already made an icon, which you've already seen as we've been testing this. What you need to do is just drag in a 72 by 72 pixel PNG file, and I usually put it in the resources folder. And for the iPad, just make sure you call it icon-ipad.png. And if you remember from iPhone programming, you would call it icon.png. Now that we have the iPhone and the iPad and the icons have different sizes, you'll need to call them icon-iPhone and icon-iPad to distinguish them. And remember that the size is different. This is a 72 by 72 pixel PNG, whereas an iPhone is a 57 by 57. So now let's build and run again. Stop it. You'll see that icon is the icon for our Radar app. And I can now launch the app from that icon as well. Let's check it out in portrait mode. So if I rotate to the right, you'll see the left-hand table go away, and in its stead, you will see this new tab bar button, which has the title root list. You click on that, and you see your list of article titles. You can click on those, and it does the same thing. Now, I don't like the name root list, so let's go back into our code and change that. And if you go into Detail View Controller and scroll down a little bit into the Split View Controller will hide view controller method, and this is called when you're switching from landscape to portrait mode, and it's hiding the root view controller and instead replacing it with the popover. This is where it sets that bar button item title to root list, and what we want to set it to, of course, is O'Reilly Radar articles. Now actually that might be a little bit long, so I'm going to change that and just say articles, because when it's in portrait mode you want to keep that button fairly short so it doesn't impact on the title in the navigation bar at the top. So let's give that a try, see if that works, and you can see that it does. You'll see that it now has the name articles instead. Now the other thing that I don't like about this app is that when it is initially running, we've got the word label up at the top instead of O'Reilly Radar. So what I can do to fix that is I can go into the detail view nib, and I can go ahead and set the value of the label here to O'Reilly Radar. And we run it again. We see when we initially start it up, we see O'Reilly Radar now instead of label. And the last thing I'm going to do is go into articles.m and comment out that code that prints out the text of the feed, because that's just slowing us down pretty significantly and we don't need that. So one more last test, and still working, which is great. have that big long log of the actual XML. We're only logging currently the titles, the end of document, and the URL of the article that we're loading as we select it or as we tap on it. So that's it for this screencast. I hope you enjoyed it and would love to get your feedback, and thank you very much.